Hello everyone and welcome to this week's episode of the Aftermath series. Let us waste no time at all and dive right into this week's episode of Critical Role. And while we did have a bit of a shorter episode this week, it was still filled with hilarious moments, juicy role-playing, and just tons of stuff that I really want to talk about. We're going to start off by talking about the scrying moments that Jester had in the beginning of the episode. And it seems that we now have more questions than answers. With the information that was presented to us in this sort of scrying moment, we can't draw too many concrete conclusions. However, there are a few things we can begin to theorize. This person and the people that this person is working with could be in league with the Crawling King. Now, as far as we know, the Crawling King is no more. However, it's possible that they are attempting to bring him back, possibly through the use of these strange devices that are creating these demonic rifts. I don't necessarily know how that could be possible, but who knows? They obviously know way more than we do. And then a few other things about this moment that happened. This person seemed rather paranoid. Now, obviously that would make sense. If he's doing some shady business, he obviously wouldn't want people knowing what he was up to. But now we do have a few more questions to ask. What is this emblem that he was speaking of? If he is in Jorhas, how is he surviving? How is he getting around? He is a human after all. Does he have connections with the higher-ups in the Kreen dynasty? Is he a traitor? And what's so important about the Overcrow? I personally am going to assume that there have been no demonic rifts in Rosanna yet, and they are deciding on Overcrow being the place to put one of these demonic rift-creating objects. It could also just be a simple meeting place. But why 13 days specifically? Is there something coming up that we don't know about? Are they planning on unleashing some enormous demonic entity onto Rosanna? And if that is the case, we still have to ask why. If the Crawling King really is no more, then what could they be hoping to accomplish? And we only assume that the Crawling King is a non-factor because Caduceus communed with the Wild Mother and he had asked if the Crawling King was a threat, which the Wild Mother replied to with, "He is not." Now, this could be a classic case of the gods being arrogant and thinking that they have everything under control, when in reality, the Crawling King is very much a threat and he could be released and unleashed onto the world once again. And if that's the case, we'll have to pay very close attention to this new cult that seems to be forming around the Crawling King. Now, that was one of the main things I wanted to talk about in this Aftermath episode. So now the next few topics are going to be pretty rapid fire. The next one being Yasha sort of rehashing her backstory to the rest of the Mighty Nine, and it was just nice to see how supportive all of the members are to Yasha's tragic backstory, and they definitely want to help her get revenge on her tribe. But it's also interesting to note all of the different parallels that not only happened with Yasha's backstory, but also just in this episode in general. The first one being Yasha and her memory gap is very similar to many of the other members. Fjord, not a little bit, obviously Caleb with the modified memory. It's just really interesting to see all of these different themes happening with multiple members of the Mighty Nine. And then of course, Yasha, Caleb, and Fjord, and Not in a way, all lost someone they love. Of course, Not is now reunited with them, but Fjord lost Vandrin, Caleb lost his parents, and Yasha lost Zuala. Again, just some interesting parallels that I noticed. And now, my favorite part of the episode, and what I will probably make my highlight video on, the reenactment. Just an absolutely hilarious moment. I can't tell you how many times I've rewatched it already, and I've just died of laughter every single time. What a beautiful, iconic moment that will be remembered for many, many years to come. And also in this episode, we had quite a few callbacks to Zadash in just earlier episodes in general. And then we also had Jester using sending on the gentleman, or her father. Now I really hope they continue following that thread in the near future, because I really do want to know if the gentleman is actually Jester's father, as I'm sure many of you wish to know this information as well. But I guess we'll have to wait and see if the party ever does go back to Zadash, and if they do, it's going to be incredibly different than the last time they were there. And now moving on, I want to talk about the dynamic between the different party members and their gods that happened in this episode. You know, we saw Jester and the Traveler having their little scrying moment. It's clear that the Traveler is very supportive of Jester, and the Jester is just absolutely in love with the Traveler. And then we have Caduceus Clay and the Wild Mother. Caduceus feels like he is following the Wild Mother's path that she has set for him. So there's that level of like respect and acknowledgement that Clay has a job to do, and he has to fulfill it to appease the Wild Mother. And then we also have Yasha and the Stormlord, which is a very rough dynamic because Yasha really just wants to know what's going on, what's her purpose, but the Stormlord really isn't giving her too much to work off of other than to struggle and to push against the bindings that hold her back. But why were those bindings there in the first place? Why is she a fallen Aasimar? There's so many questions, and Yasha, poor Yasha, is just going to have to keep moving forward. And then we have Bo, who's not really the religious type, but she does sort of follow the knowing mistress, but she's like not really sure how she feels about religion and destiny and fate and all that stuff. So it'll be interesting to see how Bo's relationship with the knowing mistress progresses, considering the other members of the party have some kind of a relationship with a god, obviously excluding Caleb and Not. And then we have the most interesting, volatile, and likely the most dangerous dynamic of all of them, and that is the one with Fjord and Uk'otoa. Now, we saw just how dangerous it can be in this episode. Now, we know that Uk'otoa saved Fjord in the shipwreck and created this bond between the two of them. And I would assume that if Uk'otoa can save Fjord's life and give him life, he can easily take it away. We saw that imagery in the symbolism of the dream that Fjord had, and then also in the morning when Fjord lost his abilities. Uk'otoa is desperately trying to scare Fjord into submission and making him do what he wants. So I am very concerned for Fjord's safety. He's going to have to try to figure something out, otherwise he might die, or at the very least he is going to lose his warlock powers for good. And then we also saw a different side of Fjord. He touched on it a little bit, but he was very quick-tempered. He was getting very angry very quickly with the various things that were happening in that morning. And Fjord sort of touched on that as he said that he let his orcish side sort of come through, which he really isn't used to considering he did grow up with humans. And obviously Fjord feels pretty bad about this because he's always sort of subtly talked about, and maybe not necessarily talked about, but it's just shown in his personality that he really doesn't like the orcish side of him. He tries to suppress it as much as possible, and he even went as far as to file away his tusks. So he's probably disappointed in himself that he let that orcish side sort of seep through the cracks a little bit. But it was also understandable considering he was very confused, very worried about his own safety, and the fact that he had lost his powers. He didn't know if he was ever going to get them back, or how he was going to tell the rest of the party if it was permanent. So it makes sense that he was a bit quick-tempered in the morning. Thank goodness Fjord has Worsh to sort of help him through this struggle that he's having. And now the last thing I want to talk about is this brand new estate that the Mighty Nine have been given. They're going to be living like royalty in Rosanna. Now, it is super awesome that they have this. However, as Taliesin put at the end of the episode, it's more than likely a gilded cage. It's going to be very simple for the Kryn dynasty to keep tabs on the Mighty Nine if they are within this home. They're going to know exactly where they live. They're going to probably more or less have people watching the estate to keep tabs on their whereabouts and what they're doing. So while it is very nice to have this home to themselves, I would tread lightly, Mighty Nine. We still don't know what the people of Xhorhas are all about just yet. But I guess for the time being, with this week of downtime coming up, you might as well enjoy yourselves. You guys have earned it. But there are some perilous events on the horizon, so don't get too comfortable. And with all of that being said, we are going to wrap up. Let me know all of your thoughts, feelings, emotions that you had during this episode. I hope you all have an absolutely wonderful rest of your weekend, and I will see you all next week.